let's go ahead and talk about this Ken Kendrick thing. Most of you probably know by now, but Ken Kendrick today was on WV MetroNews on an interview with Hoppy. Now, Ken Kendrick, for those of you who may not know, is the largest donor. I don't want to know if he's the largest, but it's just kind of assumed he is. He's the owner of the Arizona Diamondbacks. I'm not sure a lot of people are going to have more money than him, but he's a mega donor for West Virginia. He actually made a comment in an interview that he knew Wren was going to make the decision about Eilert before we did. That's how connected he is. He was on Hoppy's show today, and Hoppy asked him about, in a nutshell, I'm paraphrasing, asked him, with this job being open, what are your thoughts about Bob Huggins potentially coming back? And here is what Ken Kendrick said, and then me and Paul are going to react to it. He says, I think WVU and their handling of the Bob Huggins debacle probably were too lenient with him. Had he worked for me, he would have not had a job after he engaged in this vituperative series of homophobic remarks back in the spring, and then was retained under very difficult circumstances, and then lost his job as a result of a drunken stupor, I will call it, Kendrick said. It's the second time he's lost his job because of drunkenness. It may not be remembered by many, but it is by me. He was let go by Cincinnati for exactly the same reason. So I think he has no place in the lives of young men who deserve quality leadership. So I would be one who would wonder about the mental capacity of any leader of any university who would consider hiring him for a coaching position. Then he goes on to say, it's a hard no on his return. And he says this, instead of being in the Hall of Fame, he should be in the Hall of Shame, to be blunt. Then he did backtrack and say, I need to be more compassionate. And he said, then he went on to say, alcoholism is a disease, and he's had that disease for a long time. Now, what I just said about compassion is not in the article, but he did say that because I listened to it myself. He says alcoholism is a disease, and he's had that disease for a long time. But his future,
the article didn't.
But his future with WVU Sports is totally at an end. And anyone who would think he should be considered, I'd really question whether they ought to seek some counseling. So very strong words from mega donor and arguably West Virginia's largest donor, Mr. Ken Kendrick. So, Paul, I'm going to get your thoughts on that, and then I'm going to give you mine.
Oh, my God. I'll tell you what, man. This one here is I'm reacting to this in real time.
Yeah, Paul hadn't heard it yet, by the way, so you guys know.
From somebody that has a background like me, those are. I'm reminded of what the basic text of Narcotics Anonymous says, which is one of my favorite quotes in NA, and I know it's not for everybody. The last, and it's the very last thing usually. The last thing people forget about us is what we used to be. Like it's almost always the last thing. And it takes a lot of work to clean up those messes. It really, truly does. The freedom from the stigma of being an addict, right? It's the last thing lost to freedom, is how the book says it. The stigma of being an addict is the last thing lost to freedom. And to me, somebody who deals with that, and a lot of it's, I consider, like, I just put it on me, like it's the wreckage of my past. It's the wreckage of how I behaved. I deserve that, But once you get into the recovery process and you get several years behind you like I have, there are still people who don't forget and never forgive or forget. And Kendrick seems to be like one of those kind of guys. Now, Bob Huggins is what I would consider still a baby in recovery from alcoholism, less than a year, I think. So anytime you're in that first year, that's still extremely difficult. I don't know that he drinks occasionally or not. I'm going to assume that he went completely off, just based on things I've heard said. But this comes off incredibly judgmental. It comes off while I mean, yes, I agree that he shouldn't be, like, some of the stuff he said was true. Yeah. Okay. I don't want, nobody's asking. Well, I'm not asking for him to be the head of West Virginia basketball anymore. But these are things that can be said behind closed doors, not publicly, and I don't know why they needed to be aired publicly. Certainly he had an axe to grind here, it seems like to me. So whatever he wanted to shoot towards Bob Huggins, he did. I'm sure he had the platform over in Arizona with the Diamondbacks if he wanted to do that. And he wanted to come to West Virginia and do it, fine. But I disagree with it mostly. And I'm glad he's a donor to the school. Would appreciate everything he does for us and all that. But guys like this can tend to be a little out of touch, and these are people that never have to answer anybody, So I just hope that you, Ken Kendricks, are never in a situation like Bob Huggins was in, to where you make a misstep or you're in some kind of bad spot. Hopefully, the people that are in a position to forgive you or forget for you do that when the time comes, if it ever does.
Yeah, I'm gonna give you my thought. I'm gonna read you a super chat, and then I'll give you my thoughts. TRM Music says sounded like Kendrick had a long beef with Huggins. Thank you, TRM Music. It does kind of sound that way, doesn't it? To be honest. And then I wanted to read another comment up here from Browns and Beers. It says Kendricks went scorched earth on Huggins. As I mentioned earlier, it's how a lot of people felt at WU with Huggins after he sued the school, which he actually never did actually sue him. I think he threatened to sue him. And a vocal portion of the fan base still wanted him back. And that's the part I want to comment on, Browns and Beers. This had to be planned. The timing of this cannot be coincidental. The day you announce you're going to hire a new coach, you go get your biggest donor to come on live radio and say all these things. I think it was done, and I know by Kendrick and the university through WV MetroNews, who's kind of an arm of the university to a degree, to squash the noise in the fan base and those fans who want him back. I think they were trying to squash that narrative, and they thought the best way to do that was to have Kendrick come on here and speak his piece. I don't have an issue with wanting to squash the narrative or squash those voices or shut those people up. But did he really have to get on there and trash a guy personally like that? I feel like he could have done it in a much more friendlier, kinder, more professional manner. Again, I disagree with a lot of the things Hugs has done, but he's still a human being. He has a problem. And I did not agree with the some of the words that were used in that statement by Kendrick. Although I agree with the overall premise of it that Hugs doesn't need to be back, he didn't need to go on a 4-minute tirade about how bad of a person Bob Huggins is to do that, in my opinion. That's my thoughts on it. Again, thanks to Ken Kendrick for all he does, all he has done, and all he will do. Up there if you want. There we go. Shaggy of West Virginia, thanks for the donation. He says, Huggins didn't deserve to be trashed by a billionaire who has no idea how much Huggins means to the average Mountaineer.
I agree with that.
I just think he could have said it. Saying Hall of Shame.
Why can't he say this on the phone to him? That's what I don't understand.
And don't say, how the Hall of Shame comment, and maybe it was Hoppy too. I don't know. It seems like it does.
Hoppy's had an agenda.
Well, this wasn't. It was on Hoppy's show, and then one of his colleagues wrote the article, Brad McElhaney. But it does kind of seem like WV MetroNews has been part of an anti-Hugs agenda, doesn't it?
No doubt about that. Hoppy Hirschville, I told you on the show last time or time before last that he was almost quivering with joy talking about some of the bad things with Hugs. Like he loves it.
Yeah. I like Hoppy, but I don't always agree with everything he says and does, The like button always helps if you're watching live or on the replay. It helps the algorithms. Comments help if you're watching on the replay as well. But we appreciate it. Again, all the support. Don't forget to go to Dutch Miller Auto for your automotive needs. We thank them for sponsoring us here on the show. We have nothing else to say, and we're done.